My name is Jochen, as you can see. I work for Amplexor. I have currently about 4 years experience with Drupal. And in the very early days, I can still remember that creating and developing a website, and especially deploying it to a web host, was pretty time-consuming. So in some ways, we developers always try to be in some kind of lazy. We don't like to do things over and over again, so it's always easier to just hit a button and deploy your website, especially if you have multiple environments. And this is the case when you have a good deployment strategy, then it's easy to deploy to multiple stages of your website. And the most important thing is to have a good tool for that. And that's where Capistrano can help you with. So first of all, I will explain what Capistrano is, how you can use it. And next I will give a demo, so you can eventually ask some questions after that. And the main goal of this session is actually that after this session you know how to use it, how to install it, and how to implement it in your next project. I'm going to make one small note. This session goes about Capistrano version 2. Some weeks ago they released version 3 after many years. It's pretty different. So if you install Capistrano today, it can be that it's a little different from what I'm going to show you. But you can always install version 2. They even refer to the documentation of version 2 on their website, so it's still relevant. Yeah, this was the very nice logo of version 2. You can see that there is a guy sitting on the island and just waiting for a fish. So that's kind of what we're doing if we are going to deploy Capistrano. We just hit a button and wait. Luckily, they created a new logo, which is a bit more appealing. So that's nice too. So what is Capistrano? Capistrano is an open source tool for running scripts on multiple servers, and its main goal is to deploy web applications. Now, it automates the process of making new version of an application available on one or more web services. Web servers, excuse me. What you need for that is SSH access. So developing probably happens on your laptop, and what you need is SSH access to your different servers from your laptop. Here you can see a schema of what is a typical setup. So at the left we have, for example, my own laptop, and at the right we have the multiple, the different kind of servers. It can be a development server. Most of the time we have a staging environment, and of course we have production. Initially, Capistrano was born, let us say born in the Ruby on Rails web application framework to deploy those kind of web applications. But it also has been used for other web applications, to deploy other web applications like PHP frameworks, etc. So yeah, where comes the Drupal part? So that's the question I will answer later on in the demo, or even eventually a little bit earlier in the explanation. So to sum up, a typical Capistrano setup consists of multiple recipes. Recipes are a set of actions the Capistrano script will take when he deploys a website on a server. And this is where we can do the specific Drupal stuff. In those recipes, you can create your own recipes, or you can download recipes from the internet, from other people creating it. So what are the prerequisites? First of all, as I said, SSH. And of course, you need a repository because your servers need to have to access those to download the most recent code. And last but not least, of course, we need a server, or preferably multiple servers. In version 2 of Capistrano, you can use Git, Subversion, or Mercurial for your repository. I think in version 3 it's only Git at the moment. So, but as we are all Drupal developers, for most of us, this won't be a problem. The installation is pretty short, especially if you have a Mac. You are lucky because Ruby is already installed on your PC. So launching this command will be easy because everything is already there. The only thing you have to do is download Capistrano itself, and eventually some extra recipes, as we can see on the next screen. So first of all, we need Capistrano, but we also need some extra things like Railsless deploy. In version 2 of Capistrano, it's necessary to explicitly say that your web application is not going to use Ruby on Rails, so something else. That's something they changed in version 3, so now you have to say that if in case you're doing Ruby on Rails, you have to say that your code is in Ruby on Rails, but for us it's not necessary. So again, in version 3, we don't need to say that it's Railsless deploy. And the last recipe over there is Cap Drupal. It's a recipe created by someone, and it consists, it has many tasks necessary to deploy your Drupal website on a server. And I will show you that later. When we are going to create a new deploy project, in this case, I call it just my project. You have to go to the root of your project and launch the Capfile command. And what it does is it will create some files for you, like a config file, a deploy RB file, and the main cap file. So that's what we see here. This is a structure which will be created when you first create your deploy project. So the cap file first. In the cap file, we will say that it is Railsless. And we also have to do some other loads like deploy or config deploy. That's always the same. By default, a deploy.rb file will be created where we are going to say which repository we are going to use, like we see here. So the name of the application is my project, and as you can see, it refers to a fictive Bitbucket repository. And by default, we are going to use the master branch, which is available over there. Of course, I have to give my username and some other options like SSH options, which is necessary to forward your SSH keys, authentication options to the server so that they can access your Git repository. Of course, the server needs to be known, which can be different for each staging, where I will refer to that later. And the deploy path, which can be also different for each staging environment depending on which sort of architecture you're using, like Ubuntu or Debian, etc. And also a nice note is the last node over here. So after we have done the deploy, there will be a cleanup, which is necessary to wipe out older versions of your websites. That's not really necessary, but to keep the server a little bit clean and to save some disk space, it's also always useful to do that. So, but so far no Drupal. So where's the Drupal part? That's where Cap Drupal comes in. It's a Ruby recipe specifically created for Capistrano. And once you have loaded the Cap Drupal recipe into your project, you need to, of course, define some required variables. Like you have to say where Drush is, at which path, and if you want to download it, yes or not. The Cap Drupal recipe has the option not to have Drush on your server, so it will download it for you in case you do not have it over there. But mostly, if we have servers, we always install Drush on it, so I always put download to Drush to false. And the last two lines of this file is necessary to tell the deployment procedure where are the files and the settings files. This is necessary because those will be shared over all the different versions. So for each deploy we do, they will always use the same file folder and settings folder. So they don't need to be copied over, etc. It goes pretty fast because it's a shared folder. And what do we have to do if you have multiple servers or multiple stages better? We also need to say Capistrano that it is a specific procedure for multiple servers. And that's what we see in the folder structure here. So for every staging environment, for every server, we are going to create a specific file for it. So in this example, I have created a production server and a staging server. So that's why I created these two files extra in the deploy folder. And again, in the main deploy file, we also need to refer them. So both staging and production, and staging will be the default. So if I run my Capistrano command, it will always run the staging. It will always trigger the staging environment. It's a good thing not to place production in this, because if you once make a mistake, you're deploying to production. That's not always nice. This is a small example of the production file. It contains, of course, the URL of the server, which branch. In this case, as we saw earlier, the master branch was a default branch, but on production, I have created a branch for it specifically, which I always will do for staging also. And of course, the path to the root of your Drupal installation. So when staging will look very similar, except the branch and the path will be different. So the first time we are going to launch Capistrano, we have to tell that it has to create a specific structure on the servers. So that's where the setup recipe comes in. And these are those commands. As you can see, the first one will launch or will do the setup on the staging, as that is the default. And the second one will do the same on production. And what it will do is create this folder structure. It will create a sort of folder. It's not really a folder. It's actually a symbolic link, namely the current. And it will create a releases folder where all the different releases of your deploy will go in. And the shared folder where the files folder and the settings files will go in. So as I said earlier, current will be a symbolic link to the most recent version of your website. And once your server is set up, the next thing you have to do is check if everything is okay, if all the dependencies are there, etc. So for that, there is a command, and it's deploy check. Just the same as for the previous command, you can do cap deploy check, which will trigger the check recipe on the staging environment, as it is the default. And of course, if you want to do the same on production, you need to place production between cap and deploy. So if everything is okay, so you first had set up everything on the servers, and secondly, you have checked it, and if it's okay, then you can go further and finally deploy everything. So let's deploy. And that's pretty simple. The command is just cap deploy, and this will trigger the deploy recipe on the staging environment. And again, if you want to do the same on production, it will be cap production deploy. And what if anything goes wrong? There is a command for it too, and it's the rollback command. So if something goes wrong, you can always do cap deploy rollback. Or actually, even better is the last command, which is with an extra dot code. I have to make a small note to this. If your update procedure of your Drupal website has a lot of database updates, your database will be, after the deploy, very different to what it was before. So the best thing is actually to create a sort of backup automatically with Capistrano, which is not so difficult. But the most difficult part is actually putting, if something goes wrong and you do the rollback command, the most difficult part is actually putting back the backed up database back in the current version. This is not by default in Capistrano, neither in the Cap Drupal recipe, so it's best to do it your own, because it will be always very specific to your needs. And that's about the commands of Capistrano. So here comes the demo part. Is it big enough? Okay. So this is the main cap file. For the purpose of this session, I have got a server of my dear friend Kevin, where I have created 2 environments. Let me see. So I have a dcl-staging.candisa.be, which is the staging of this project, and I just used the repository of the Drupalcamp Leuven website for this demo. And the same goes for dcl.candisa.be, which mimics a production server. So I have 2 of them. And of course, I have a local environment. Oops. First of all, as you can see, this is the link to my repository. Yeah. A little bit bigger. Okay, I will try. Okay. So these the first lines I already covered in the first part of the session. So it's just the URL to the Git repository, which together with the username, the default branch, which is master in this case, SSH options, and something special about this one is also that I'm going to deploy via export. This is a nice tip if you have a web hosting account with limited disk space. So by using export, you can actually make free some space on the server. The other option is to use this one, remote cache, but it will create a sort of extra folder with a complete history of all your your Git repository. So it can be pretty huge. But the good thing about the remote cache is that it's much faster. Use sudo, I set it to false because I'm not sudo user on the servers. And in this case, I will keep 2 releases. So as you already saw, for each release, there will be created a folder in the releases folder. But after the deployment is done, you will remove the oldest folders in this releases folder to just keep it clean. And in this case, you will keep 2 releases, which is not that much, but okay. And that's about the deploy file. For staging, I have set the branch to staging, of course, so it uses another branch than production. And that's about it. And then production is nearly the same as staging. I used, of course, the production branch. And different with this one is that I use remote cache on the production one, just for the demo. And after every deploy is done, there will be a permissions check, just to make sure that every file is just like in your install file of your Drupal website. There is a list of some files which you have to do, make sure it's not readable for anyone who does not need to read it. Then this is the website of the Drupal Leuvenkamp, and what I'm going to do is changing the date of the countdown timer. Currently, the website shows, if I go to the real, Let's Rock. So yesterday there was a countdown down timer, and I'm going to put it back by just changing the date to next week or something. So I found this in the code, which is today at 8 o'clock. So let's change that to the 21st of September and save that. Again, I'm busy on my local development environment, so which is the master branch. As you can see, I changed 14 to 20 to 21. So now I'm going to push it to the Git repository on GitHub. Voila. And let's go to the staging branch then, and merge it in over there. Okay, so now I updated the repository to set the countdown timer on next week. And the next thing I will have to do is cap deploy. I don't need to say staging, but it's perfectly possible to do that. But in this case, it's not necessary. So let's deploy. And now you can see that he is going to do a lot of commands. And he does everything for me. As the staging will use an export, it will take a little longer than if I do the same thing on production, because that uses a remote cache. So as you can see over there, he took the site offline, for example, just here, the maintenance mode. He updated the database, cleared the cache, did all the feature reverts if necessary, and he's still busy. And then after that, he put the site back online, the maintenance mode again, and last but not least, again, a cache clear to make sure that everything is okay after all the updates. And this is the permissions check over here to make sure that all files are okay or protected. So now if I go to my staging environment over here and I refresh, and wait a bit because he needs to create a cache again. Server seems to be busy. Aha, so now the countdown timer is updated to next week. And we couldn't do the same for production. But of course we have to do the same thing again for merging the branches, etc. So let's do the same for production. And this one will go much faster because he uses remote cache. As you can see, this goes a lot faster. But it will require that you have a lot more disk space. So that's one of the drawbacks. But Okay, nearly done. Yep. So now let's refresh it. And it will be the same over here. Okay, so now we did the same on the production environment. In case something went wrong, you can always use the deploy rollback commit. So I'm going to do that one just to show you. So that's cap production deploy. Okay, and if I now go back to the website and refresh all things again, it should have updated the countdown timer back to its original state. Voila. And it's back to what it was before. So that was it about the demo. If there are any questions, feel free to ask. Everything clear?
Does version 3 have database update backups integrated?
Well, no, I can show you. It is not integrated into the cap Drupal recipe, neither in Capistrano itself, because it's Ruby on Rails specific. But what I do for some other projects is this is an example of a backup for another project I used. So before doing actually an update of the website, he is going to create a complete archive dump with Drush. So that's pretty safe if you want to have a backup. Because an archive dump will also get your files directory, etc. So, and this one is just the same, but only for your database. So that's possible. But it's not really possible to really directly put the database back, but or not by default. You can create it your own. Yeah. Okay. Then I thank you for your attention.